Blackman. Reid Blackman, Neil Sahota. I'm so glad to have you today on the Cain Podcast to discuss what, in my estimation, is the only story that there is to discuss. I think when we're talking about politics, culture, when we're talking about religion, almost everything will be impacted, in my estimation, by artificial intelligence. And so I've had small conversations with both of you. Why don't we start this one out by just saying, I'd love to hear your perspectives on whether or not you are an optimist or a pessimist about the effect of AI on humanity. I think I would like to start with Neil.
All right. Well, I am definitely an optimist. AI, like all technology, is just a tool. It's about how we as people choose to wield it. And I, for one, believe that most people are good and will do good things with it.
And Reid, optimist or pessimist?
Definitely not an unfettered optimist like Neil. One reason is that it's not just a tool that if we use it well, then we'll do okay, because there's lots of ways that it operates that you unintentionally create a tremendous amount of harm. So there's the intentional harms and then there's the unintentional. I think lots of people, I definitely think there will be many people, thousands of people benefited in amazing ways by it. I also think there will be many, many people deeply hurt by it.
Okay, I think you both in your initial answers have actually touched on what will be the bulk of the conversation, and that is the effect that human beings have, the amount of control we truly will be able to exert over AI before it possibly begins to exert its control over humanity. So, Neil, you said you believe, it's interesting, you went philosophical very quickly, and you said you believe that most of humanity is good. In that answer, I think you acknowledged that one of the risks we run is who controls the AI, and what is their purpose, and what is their moral bearing. Do you feel like, in the end, AI will simply be a product of humanity, and it's up to us to determine who are the good stewards of AI?
I mean, to a degree, Will, I think you're talking about AI as kind of a product, and let's be honest. Let's just call it that. AI is the child of humanity, and how we raise it is going to play a big role. What it winds up doing, well, like every parent, we can't fully know, but I think. To Reid's point, yeah, there's some things that bad people will do, but more importantly, there's some things that are actually going on that people don't fully understand. We have technologists working on things, they don't fully understand how it works anymore. We call that the interpretability issue, and that's the key thing. Can we jump ahead of this? Yeah. Are we trying? That's the challenge.
And Reid, you immediately brought up unintended consequences, that sort of we're playing with something that we can't even possibly imagine, regardless of our motivations, right? Regardless of good people or bad people, we can't even imagine how this child grows up.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, I don't think that a lot of the bad stuff that's happened with AI or that can happen with AI is because the data scientists or the engineers who built it intended to harm. It's just that there's so many decisions that they make along the way in building and deploying AI that have ethical implications, and they're not aware of it. And even if they are aware of it, they're not centrally equipped with the resources to make wise, informed decisions, because after all their training is in data science. And usually they've got a Ph.D. in physics, and then they've sort of been trained up to be data scientists. So they don't have the training, experience, background, or even authority to responsibly address the ethical issues. So they're making decisions with massive ethical impacts without even knowing that they're doing that.
So give me an example, Reid.
People, though.
Right. And so give me an example. And I love how you describe that. You don't even know you're toying with morality. You don't even know you're making ethical evaluations as you simply plug in ones and zeros into the potential of artificial intelligence. But give me an example how many of today's data scientists programming AI could be making ethical decisions and not even knowing so.
Yeah, so I'm going to give you two kinds of cases. So when we talk about AI, first of all, I think it's helpful to distinguish between narrow AI, which is, these predictive models that make judgments about what are they going to default on the mortgage? Are they going to be a good candidate for the job? Are they going to be good at the university? Should they get insurance? What should their premium be? Those are really specific. They're specific to a use case. And then there's general purpose AI. That's ChatGPT. That's the stuff that is putting people's hair on fire right now. because it's general purpose. It's not built for a particular thing. It's built for all kinds of tasks. So you can use ChatB to create marketing material, make medical diagnoses, write a play. There's just, there's so many different kinds of things you can use it for. Now, the people who are building that general purpose stuff like ChatGPT, they're just building capacity, right? And they don't even always know what kinds of capacities it has. And then they release it to all these developers downstream who are going to use it for countless use cases. And then they're also not really transparent about how they built that base model. So they're making ethical decisions in how they built that base model that then everyone else builds on. And then they're making decisions about how transparent or not they're being about what they did when they built it in the first place to those downstream developers, which can inhibit them from doing their real due diligence. So those are ethical decisions that they're making. There's other kinds of ethical decisions like, hey, let's use this data set without even thinking about the privacy implications. Or let's use this training data. Let's train our let's say our mortgage on it. Or famously, one healthcare institution created an AI that discriminated against black people. It said, hey, doctors and nurses, pay more attention to white patients than to sicker black patients. Because they didn't really think that, oh, you know what we should do? We should use training data that has to do with how people have spent money on healthcare. Let that be an indicator of who needs attention, of who needs healthcare. And it turns out that, of course, you can't spend money you don't have, and white people spend more money on healthcare because black people don't have as much money in the States. They didn't realize that. They weren't intending to discriminate against black people. They just chose some training data that they thought would help them create an accurate, powerful AI. But they accidentally chose something that had discriminatory impacts. And so, not bad people, just bad oversight, lack of oversight, lack of understanding what they were doing.
I think at this point, for my benefit and for perhaps the benefit of everybody listening as well, let's do this, Neil. Would you help me understand how AI works, what it is, in the simplest of terms possible for the layman, what it is as a technological tool and how it works?
Real simply put, it's a computer system that can do tasks that require some level of cognition, some level of thought to it. It's not just a plug and play. And the way it's able to do that is through training data and actual training. So we actually have to teach the machine how to do these things, and we help it, with the cognitive aspect by giving it something called the ground truth, rules on how to make decisions. And if those rules are flawed, or as Reid's talking about, the training data is flawed, it'll learn incorrectly. It can have disparate impact, it can have implicit bias. So it's just like trying to teach a child. If we don't do a great job of it, or we intentionally skew the training, the AI doesn't know any different. It just accepts that as the truth.
Can I give a slightly different spin?
Sure.
And I think this is not incompatible with anything Neil said. It's just a different way of thinking about it that I think is totally compatible. It's just software that learns by example. It's software that learns by example. Everyone knows what software is. You're listening using software right now. You use Microsoft Word, that's a piece of software. Any website you go to, that's a piece of software. And it learns by example. So you want to learn what your dog Pepe looks like? Give it a bunch of examples of what your dog Pepe looks like. Give it a bunch of photos of Pepe. And then when you take a new photo of Pepe, it's going to be like, yeah, that's Pepe, because I learned from all those other examples what Pepe looks like in photos. You want to know what a mortgage-worthy application looks like? Give it a bunch of examples of mortgage-worthy applications, and it'll learn what they look like. So when you give it a new mortgage application, it'll be like, yeah, that's the one that looks like a mortgage-worthy application, or no, it doesn't. Or give it, keep going. You can just keep going with this. Is this person going to develop diabetes in the next 2 years? Well, give it a bunch of examples of medical profiles of people who develop diabetes within the next 2 years, and it'll learn from those examples. If you want a fancy word for example, use the word data. It's software that learns by example. It's software that learns by data. That's the core of AI. It's just software that learns by example or software that learns by data. But once you see that it can learn by example, once you see that it learns by example and examples are just data, the data can be private data, so you have privacy violations. The examples can be discriminatory in nature, so it learns to discriminate. The patterns, the examples that it's learning from, what it sees, what it learns, it can be really, really, really mathematically complex, and then it comes up with conclusions that you don't understand. That's the black box problem, or Neil referred to it as the interpretability problem. But that's the core of it. It's just software that learns by example.
Let's come back to the black box problem in just one moment. So software that learns by example, as you were describing that, Reid, the most obvious example that popped into my head, and you can, and I'm asking you to correct me if I'm wrong, is I'm trying to think of already in use popular applications of AI. Is that what my iPhone is doing when it's coming up with facial recognition of here are other photos of this person? Give me some examples that are already in use, both of you. In fact, let's start with Neil. What's an example right now that everybody listening probably doesn't even realize they're interacting with AI?
Well, Will, you talked about facial recognition. It's not just like trying to memorize the way you look in your face. There's certain points, it's measuring, like the bridge of your nose to your cheekbone or to your distance between your eyes. So it's trying to do those kinds of comparisons, and that's how it can account for changes in weight or if you have facial hair or some of these other things. So it's essentially trying to calculate some way we're doing. Similarly, you use social media or you get a news feed. There are actually AI algorithms behind the scenes that are looking at, okay, what are you clicking on, what articles, how long are you spending on reading them, trying to figure out what are your interests, what are your opinions, so that it can serve you content. So it's trying to serve you content and trying to learn.
So Netflix's recommendation algorithm.
That'd be a good example.
All right, Reid?
Yeah, I mean, I'd give similar kinds of examples. I don't actually think it's actually, and Neil, you can correct me if I'm wrong, it's not actually looking at your cheekbones and the bridge of your nose. It's looking at the pixels in the picture and the mathematical relations among those pixels. It doesn't see eyes and ears and a nose. It just sees pixels arranged, and then it's looking for thousands of mathematical relations among those thousands of pixels, which is why you get the black box, because we don't look at things at the pixel level. You and I see eyes, ears, nose. Oh, and that person has the same eyes, ears, and nose. It must be a picture of the same person. The AI, the software, is just looking at those pixels and the mathematical relations among those pixels, and then sees if those same mathematical relations are present in another picture. And if so, it's like, yep, that's Will again. Yeah. So that's one example.
So let me jump in because Reid's making a good point. We are giving it a ground truth on, okay, which mathematical distance between the pixels are important. But his pixel example is actually really important because it shows that machines actually think differently about things. If we see like a picture, we're looking for objects. But as Reid is saying, with an AI, it's looking at pixels. We've seen this, you add just a little bit of noise. You take a picture of like a panda, you kind of muck up a handful of the pixels. It goes from knowing that's a panda and thinking it's like, a gibbon or something else, even though it's clearly a panda.
Right. And so I love how you two are building off of one another, and it leads us into the black box understanding, the black box concept, which will then lead us, I think, into some of the more philosophical and futuristic applications of AI. So you guys have used, for example, my face or a human face. Neil, you're referencing the panda. The one I've heard referenced is a cat. So like how you described it, Reid, it learns by example. So you want your software to understand what is the physical embodiment of a cat. And it sees example after example after example, and it accepts yeses or nos. At some point, humans are helping it, I assume, on correct or incorrect examples. But at some point as well, it takes off on its own. Maybe it encounters a fox, and it thinks that fox is a cat. It needs a human one more time to tell it, no, that's slightly different. And it calculates the differences in those pixels and then continues on. But we don't, and the way I've understood it, and I'm open to both of you telling me, well, you got this slightly wrong, Will. We don't actually understand how it's translating all of those pixels into conclusions, in other words. That's the black box. We don't understand how it is learning, which is a wild thing for me to think about. It's hard for me to understand that. It's hard for, I'm sure, a lot of people listening as well. We can't figure out how it's getting so smart. Reid?
Well, I mean, we know how it's getting so smart. We don't, but the thing that it's smart enough to learn, so to speak, is what we don't get. So there's exceptions to that, but it's that pattern, that Will Cain pattern, all pictures of Will Cain, that could be a 100-page mathematical formula. We can't keep that in our heads at the same. That's what's unintelligible to us. Not that it's making certain kinds of predictions, but that the rules that transform inputs to outputs. Input is new photo of Will. Output is yes, that's Will, or no, it's not Will. that mathematical rule is just too big for us to get into our heads. And we're talking about pictures of people, pictures of dogs, of wolves, of cats. You might think, well, who cares? Who cares that we don't understand as long as it gets it right? I just want the right photos to go in the right folders. But if it's high stakes, you're going to have diabetes in 2 years, you'd be a bad applicant, a bad candidate for this job, so you're denied an interview. You're denied admission to the college, you're given a high risk rating, and so you don't get bail. High risk stuff, you start to think, maybe we really need to understand why we're getting these outputs.
Yeah, and Neil, the way I'm going to have you jump in here, but the way I've also understood it, and I'd love you to introduce me to the concept a little bit of neural nets. I've read a little bit about neural nets, and this is sort of the layered ability of itself to learn on top of its previous learning. From what I've understood, not only is it as Reid describes that we couldn't hold that mathematical computation in our head, but at some point we cease to understand the math that it is doing, even if we could write it out. So it's developed its own level of intelligence within mathematics, in many cases its own language, where we can't even figure out, we can't deconstruct it back to any understandable level.
Yeah, so that's a really good point, Will, in that we don't so much program the AI systems, it's learning, it's wiring its own neural network. So based off the training data, human teaching, the data it's analyzing, it's kind of wiring its own network, much like our brains wire synapses. But sometimes we don't know actually how that's working. Reid actually mentioned dogs and wolves. There was actually a research project to see could we train an AI system to detect the difference between a wolf or a dog, and it seemed to be working. Then we started showing pictures, and it started saying things like, well, this is actually a wolf, even though it was clearly a dog. And so we started going through what's going on, and what we realized was in the training data, every picture we showed of it with a wolf had snow in the background. So we didn't really train an AI system to see the difference between a dog or a wolf. We trained a snow detecting AI system because that's the association it made. And to us, we're like, that was stupid, but to the machine, that's unfortunately how it works. And we didn't understand that.
Okay, I want to stop here for a moment. I want to talk about human influence then. Okay, one of the first things, and I know nothing about either of your politics, okay? You both have been on Fox and Friends with me at separate occasions, and I know nothing of either of your politics, and I find it inconsequential. But I think that one of the things that we saw in the first couple iterations of ChatGPT that was somewhat recognized, and I think that even OpenAI went back and tried to address, was it was beginning to show, or it was already through its birth showing, liberal bias, which I have to assume was the manifestation of the human influence on that system. So, let's play in that area for a minute of conversation. Let's play in the area of how much control and how, this is kind of where you started, Neil. Forgive me. I'm not gonna use left and right as proxies for good and bad, but I am going to use that to say we definitely have the ability to put perspective on the AI's value system. Is that correct, Neil?
Yeah, that's a very fair observation, Will.
And then go ahead, Reid. That has massive long-term implications, Reid.
Yeah, absolutely. There's at least three things. One is you could intentionally say to a chat GPT, favor the left or favor the right or whatever, and that would be a way of influencing it. You might also say some things that seem to you to be politically neutral, but in fact have political implications.
Right.
It could be a coincidence. To give you an example, when this is a slightly different thing, but it'll help bring out the point, I think. When Amazon was training its resume reading AI, its resume reading software, it was trying to get it to not discriminate against women, because the thing that it first learned was that we don't hire women around here. That's the pattern that it found. They said, don't ignore all that, ignore the woman stuff. But then the software started picking out resumes that use the word execute, like I executed on a strategy. And it turns out that men use that more than women do. And so they still got discriminatory, male favoring outputs, even though they were trying to get rid of, because the word execute highly correlates with being a man in a resume.
But wait, didn't Amazon give it the value? But didn't Amazon give it the value in your example to not discriminate against women? So I would have assumed it had the opposite effect. If you use the word execute, it's booting male resumes.
No, so what they said was, so first they just gave it, like 10 years of hiring data. Like, here are the resumes that we got in the past 10 years and the ones that were given a thumbs up and a thumbs down. Learn from these examples which are the good resumes and which are the bad ones. What's the pattern? What's that mathematical pattern as it were, the pixels of the resumes? And it learned that we don't hire women around here. So then when you gave it a new resume, if it all else equal, if it was a men's resume, it got a green light. If it was a woman's resume, it got a red light. They said, and they learned, oh, you know what? It's picking up on things like women's NCAA basketball, or the name of a college that's a women's only college, or the name of the person, Mary, right? They said, let's ignore all that stuff and now redo it. And it would find other things that highly correlated with being a man or a woman, and then make judgments based on that. My point is that they were actively trying to not discriminate against women, but it kept finding what seemingly gender neutral features that would correlate with gendered features. And the reason I'm bringing this up is that you could train your chat GPT, be mean to liberals or be mean to the conservatives, but you could also say, whatever, do X, and accidentally that correlates with being right or left. And then the last thing I want to point out, I asked someone, a VP of research at Microsoft, was just talking to him yesterday or 2 days ago, and I said, ChatGPT has a certain personality. It makes things up sometimes. What they call hallucinations. It'll BS. It's not, and when you try to correct it, it's obstinate. It'll say, no, I'm not wrong. I'm not wrong. You're wrong. I'm right. And I said, why does it have that personality? Why isn't it modest? Why can't it be intellectually modest and say, you know what, I really don't know? I said, so it has this kind of personality. Why does it have that personality rather than an intellectually humble personality? This guy had access to ChatGPT 6 months before anybody else did. And he said, I don't know. They don't know. So there's direct ways to make it, say, politically biased. There are accidental ways to make it politically biased. And then there are ways that it gets politically biased where they're just like, we have no idea how this happened.
Neil, I can see you want to jump in.
Yeah, because Reid's making a really important point, and his Amazon example is actually a powerful, example of how we don't understand things, because even though this was meant to, find quality candidates, one of the things they actually did with their training was, we'll look at the past 10 years of people we hired, didn't hire, blah, 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 but they primarily hired men during that time period. And what we apparently didn't know at the time was, at least Amazon didn't, is men and women use different words. And so it picked up on those male words like Reid is talking about. So it wasn't like an intentional thing. And it wasn't until they did a linguistic analysis they understood what was going on. It's the exact same thing. If you look at political parties or which way you lean, liberal or conservative, people are using different words. And the AI is going to pick up on that. And that's the biggest challenge. You'll love this. Well, the UN wants AI robot judges, right? Tons of data on all that. We had to study where's the implicit bias at. You know what the biggest bias in our judicial system is? How hungry the judge is.
I've read those studies.
The more
I've actually, yeah.
How do you account for that then? How do you train an AI and strip out that bias?
Yeah, I've seen the data on people going up before parole boards, actually, and that those that show up to the parole board before lunchtime have a higher granted rate of parole than those that show up late for lunch. You know what I mean? Or so, in other words, if the board is sitting there hungry and wanting to get to lunch, I'm sorry, you're going to spend another couple years in jail. The political side of me is concerned about the short-term implications of a world where, and I don't need you guys to respond to this because, again, I don't know your politics, where liberal ideology seems to control what is considered mainstream and appropriate. And conservative ideology is increasingly marginalized as radical, whether or not that's in pop culture or in media. And I'm scared of it showing up in AI. But I'm going to be real with you guys. I'm more scared of AI to both of your points, becoming something that has its own bias independent of the human programmer, which in the end seems the inevitability. That seems, I think you could put Bernie Sanders in charge of programming AI and he has no idea what its end result will be. He cannot predict whether or not AI is a socialist. That's probably where I think I'm headed, because I think this thing sounds, I go back to you on this, Neil, because you're the one that was the unfettered optimist at the outset. This thing sounds absolutely, to me, uncontrollable.
Right now, it only does what we've taught it to do, and it's not like sitting there thinking, trying to learn more skills. Will it happen one day? Maybe. But I think that's the biggest challenge is, yeah, AI is going to probably start developing some of these things that we don't fully understand. But it's on us as people to also not just try and manage that, but jump ahead of it. We've always been good historically about when new technology comes out, rising to the challenge, taking on the more complex work, trying to, figure it out. But the rate of change is so fast. We don't have a lot of time to course correct. And I think that's the real challenge. I have faith in society, but we can't just sit on our laurels thinking there's a lot of smart people working on that. We each need to do our own part here.
Okay, let's come back to a minute what society's control mechanisms may be. Hey, Reid, are you familiar, I'm sure that you are because you're immersed in this AI world, are you familiar with the paperclip optimization scenario?
Yeah. Yeah.
So would you explain that? I find that very illustrative, and I don't know whether or not both of you do or not, but the idea that you create an AI whose sole objective is to make the most paper clips as efficiently as possible, and how that directive and that algorithm can end up ruling humanity.
Right. So you tell an AI, it's not just an AI, but it's an AI it's not just a piece of software. It's got to be hooked up to the world in some way such that it can have an impact, right? It doesn't just sit there on your computer. Right. So you tell it, create as many paper clips as you can, maximize quantity of paperclip output, and then it starts, tearing apart buildings and just destroying all of humanity, taking away all the mountains and, building paper clips. Maybe, there's probably some materials within the human biological system that could be used to make more paper clips. So it starts killing people to make more paper clips. That's the
And
scenario.
it's not evil. It has no emotions. It's simply pursuing its directive of maximizing as many potential efficiently created paper clips.
Yeah. I mean, so first of all, one thing to say is that we're far away from that kind of thing for now, because we don't yet have anything like, robots with infinite access to, to resources. We don't have that. Even if you sort of had a little robot like from the Boston Dynamics guys, right, who have those robots doing flips and stuff off of crates, and you told it maximize paper clips, if they went to they don't have money. They could be taken down by some police. They don't have authorization to the nuclear codes or anything like that. But look, what that draws out, I think what the real thing the pragmatic real thing that we should walk away from a story like that is that every application needs sufficient due diligence from a safety perspective, ethical and safety perspective. Because there's tests, right? And this goes for, especially if we're talking about a black box model, especially if we're talking about a thing that we don't really understand how it works. We need to figure out, okay, what are the appropriate benchmarks for safe enough to deploy this thing, right? We do that with planes. Right? Planes, you can't just build a plane and start saying, okay, everyone, I'm selling tickets, hop on. You got to meet certain benchmarks for what constitutes a safe enough airplane or a safe enough car. And so we need benchmarks for what constitutes safe enough for deployment for AI.
Okay.
And if we don't do that, then we're in trouble.
Go ahead. And so, okay, I'll play the dumb devil's advocate here. Okay, so, all right, to me, in a way, that sounds like a grand plan for ants to control the problem with humanity. These humans are going to destroy our ant colonies, and we got to figure out a way to put some control mechanisms on these humans. From what I've been told, at least maybe not where we are today, but in not too distant future, AI is going to so far outpace us in intelligence that we have a hard time really comprehending the scale. It's not Einstein to somebody with a very below average IQ. It is exponentially larger than that. And so if that's the case, once we sort of open that Pandora's box, I don't know. There's no outlet where we unplug it. I don't know if there's any server farm where we contain it. It outthinks us at every step of the way. And I hear you read on the fact that, well, it doesn't have that interface with the physical world in a real sophisticated way yet. But how long until it figures out how to overcome the nuclear codes? How long until it figures out that it can escape and live wherever it wants, and it's in the cloud, and it has no home base? And if its intelligence is that far outpacing humanity's, I don't know how we do what you both have said. I'll go you, Neil, first, and get ahead of it.
Well, you're pulling like the Matrix scenario right here, man. I love it. But you're right. That's part of the challenge. But again, I'll go to my parent-child analogy in that, every parent wants their child to hopefully be smarter, more successful than they were. And so it's always about trying to raise it right. But that's the challenge. What does right mean? We don't have like a uniform code of ethics or morals. Everyone has a different perspective, which is why we're stressing about what's going to happen with AI. At the same time, we know we can try and at least manage or guide this a bit with regulation. But the way we do regulations is outdated, right? We typically wait for something bad to happen and we react or overreact. Regulators, they don't understand the technology and they don't understand the misuses or uses. You got to change the way we do regulations. You got to have the technologists, the businesses, the academics, everybody at the table essentially kind of do the scenario planning and say like, well, what could happen? And then how do we try and put either barriers or obstacles or prevent that from happening in the first place? Because at some point, this is going to run ahead of us.
Yeah. Oh, no doubt. What point, Reid, at what point does it run out ahead of us?
Well, whenever we don't do our due diligence. So there's a couple things to say. Number one, Neil, you said, there's no universal code of right and wrong. But one thing to mention, and that I think a lot of this stuff, to your point earlier, Will, is that this stuff crosses political divides. There are ethical nightmares that we all share, and I take it that the genocide of the human race is one of them, right? I don't care if you're right or left, Bernie Sanders or Trump. Genocidal maniac robots want to wipe out the human race. That's a bad thing. We're all on board. Look, Will, I think the main thing is, one thing to keep in mind is that these things don't want things. So we talk about intelligence, but it doesn't look like intelligence is what makes us go after things. So one way to think about it, and obviously things can get very complicated here, but one way to think about it is that intelligence sort of lays out the map, and desires sort of set the goal, where we want to go on the map. It sets the destination. So we have intellect that understands, that grasps, that makes connections among things, that can figure out the means to ends, but the ends are set by desire, right? Little kids, they want stuff, but they're pretty dumb, right? They don't have the intellect, but they've got desires, they've got goals. So the AI, as we're talking about it now, you can ramp up the intelligence so that it has digested the entire corpus of medical knowledge that we have and can answer questions about the human body that it would take literally thousands of doctors to have to do together. But so it'll lay out the map of medicine, if you like, better than any human can or any group of humans, but it can't set a destination. So the thing to be scared of is not that the robot is going to set a destination on the map, kill humanity. The worry is that people will either intentionally, if they're really evil, or accidentally set it to have some destination on that map.
But I don't find much comfort in that, Reid, and that's back to the paperclip analogy. I don't find comfort in the fact that AI doesn't have a set of directives, or that it does have a set of directives that doesn't seem on its face to be in competition with the existence of humanity. What I'm worried about is, yes, we give it directive, and we do not agree on moral, not just Republican, Democrat. That's a very shallow way to look at our divides within humanity on value systems and moralities. We have varying levels of religious beliefs. We have all sorts of divides within humanity. And while you say, well, we all want to survive, I think that's true. I don't know that that's true.
You might have someone that says, kill the infidels. And
you might have someone says, how that's true. But the truth is, kill the infidels is actually less threatening to me than some of the people that have held very, very high level scientific and academic positions. For example, a guy like Paul Ehrlich, who has said, hey, you know what's a problem for humanity? overpopulation. There's too many of us. Now, that's a value assessment that he has made. And if his values get imparted into the AI and the AI decides, there's too many people. And by the way, just for what it's worth, those doomsdayers have been wrong for centuries. From Malthus to Ehrlich, they've all been wrong. But if one of those guys who they continue to get high-level positions and positions of esteem imparts those values into an AI, how long until AI says, at a minimum, sorry, no more kids for you. Or at a maximum, we're going to have to do something to cull the earth. I mean, and by the way, Reid, I will just say this. I think the even more scary one is the one you've alluded to several times. Not even knowing what values you're giving it.
Yeah. I mean, look, I don't think anyone's going to deny that what we've got on our hands is a phenomenally powerful tool. And it's the beginning, right? So we talk about ChatGPT 4 now, and it's amazing. It has incredible power. Wait till 5 or 6 comes around, right? So things are going to get nuts. And then you're going to throw into the mix other kinds of technologies that we haven't even talked about, like quantum computers. Quantum computers make the processing that our best supercomputers engage in today look like kindergartners counting on their fingers. So then when you combine quantum computers, I mean, we're talking about calculating trillions of data points in fractions of a second. That's what quantum computers can do. And we're getting there. I mean, IBM, Google, they're making steady progress. So yeah, things can absolutely get out of hand. It is a serious concern. And the issue is not, I'm not afraid of killer robots with their own desires and their own consciousness and their own evil goals. But yeah, there can be absolutely really bad people who get a handle on this technology, which is one reason why when everyone is talking about democratizing AI, I get a little bit worried. I think, really, do we want everyone to have this thing? I don't want everyone to have access to CRISPR. Do I want everyone to have access to AI? Not so much.
Well, but I also don't know who I put this kind of godlike trust in as some elite group to control it either. Neil, so you heard Reid talk about it. We're talking, I think we're talking pretty far out futuristic stuff. I don't know. I actually don't know that what I said is true or not. Tell me AI in the next 5 years, in your estimation. In your estimation, how will I be using AI 5 years from now? Reid brought up, wait till you see 5 and 6. I don't know where we'll be in 5 years. We could be on, 20 and 30 AI. I don't know where we'll be. What will it look like 5 years from now?
5 years from now, I think we're going to be pretty close to having that, personal concierge that understands our needs, our opinions, can anticipate things that we want to do and be prepped for it. That's, for a lot of people, considered the holy grail. We're already at a point now where like ChatGPT can generate homework assignments and things like that. GPT-4 is going to be generating instant highlight reels from sports games. So 5 years from now, just imagine the ultimate assistant. You ever watch the show Black Mirror?
No, I didn't watch that, but I saw Her with Joaquin Phoenix. Did you see that?
I did see that. You're going to be looking at something kind of like that. I think you're going to see that, unfortunately, for some people, the AI is going to be like a person and they're going to have a relationship. And people want that. They want someone that knows them almost as well as they know themselves.
Wow. Reid, answer that same question. What do you think it will be in 5 years? How will it be part of our lives?
I agree with that personal concierge stuff. People are going to have relationships with chatbots. I think that is where we're headed. I'll tell you some places where I'm really worried about that we're headed, that I think are not just likely, but maybe even probable. Number one, I'm worried about manipulation with what you could call conversational media. We've had social media and targeted marketing and disinformation. But, imagine that you've got your trusted chatbot that can negotiate better than the best human negotiator, can manipulate and poke your buttons better than the best, poker of buttons, pusher of buttons. Everything you write to this thing, it analyzes it and does sentiment analysis on the text that you write, so it can better manipulate you. And now maybe it's just trying to sell you some sneakers, or maybe it's trying to sell you a conspiracy theory, but holy shit. Sorry, I don't know if we can swear on this podcast, but oh my God.
I think it's deserved. It's deserved in this moment.
Right? So, because this thing is going to be really, really good at pushing people's button and tricking people, and you're not going to know the intentions of that chatbot because who knows who created it. So that's one massive worry. This is one place where I think we absolutely need regulation, because otherwise we're going to have highly manipulative chatbots unleashed on unsuspecting masses. It's going to be a massive problem. That's one issue. The other thing that I see coming, and you talked about this a little bit earlier, is the black box stuff. the thing combined with, should we replace human judges? Because human judges are so biased that if they don't eat well, people get hurt. But how much do we want black box AI making decisions about in the criminal justice system about innocent or guilty, or deserves probation or doesn't deserve probation, or should be treated for this disease or shouldn't be treated for that disease? And they might prove they're really reliable, and so we think, we put them against certain tests, they're less biased than judges, so let's use them. And besides, humans are black boxes and they're biased, this is less biased. But then we're living in a world where you get a decision, denied, for whatever it is. And you say, well, why? On what grounds? And it can't really give you a reason. This is sort of like a dystopian, it's like bureaucracy at scale, or bureaucracy woven into everything, where it's an impenetrable rationale for everything. So I think we might be going to using black box models where we're at very high stakes situations. It's scary.
So both of you, whether or not it's Reid's most dystopian, which you described as a probability, actually, a dystopian view of where we are in 5 years, or I'm not even sure I would decline describing Neil's vision of us having relationships with a personal concierge as not dystopian. That may be dystopian in and of itself. Whether or not it's either one of your visions, I think what I'm taking away from both of you is life. Okay? We're talking about not my tax bracket, okay? Not the little stuff we fight over in politics. Life, how I conduct myself. I was going to say from when I awake and when I go to sleep, but no, it's probably working on me while I'm asleep as well. My life is drastically different 5 years from now. Is that correct?
100%. I think, to some of Reid's point, we're going to be order takers. I already see it. I know people that can't get between home and office without Google Maps, and all they know is I turn left when I'm told to turn left. They don't learn street names or landmarks anymore. And kind of add on to his thing about are AI systems going to try and convince you to buy stuff? Yeah, but I'm not so sure they're going to try and convince you to buy it. They're going to try and convince your AI concierge to buy it. So you're going to have AI talking with AI, trying to figure out, how do I convince another AI system to do something?
Reid, how am I supposed to make plans for my life when it sounds so drastically different 5 years from now?
You never know what's going to happen. When I was a professor, students would ask, should I prepare for this? Should I do this? Should I do that? And I would say, listen, you don't know what's going to happen. This was before AI. You don't know what's going to happen. You do the things that you want to do anyway. I still think there's going to be room for expertise. Right, so I still think there's going to be room for people to engage in creative acts, to critique creative acts. I do think that there will be ways that some of people's work will be not replaced, but will genuinely be augmented. So I don't think anything fundamental. I don't think you should change the course of your life at this point because you see what's coming. Not unless you're already interested in doing it.
It's hard to project employment forward. It's hard to project a career.
Right. 5 years ago, even fewer than that, we always thought that AI is going to replace the jobs that are dumb, dirty, and dangerous, the 3Ds. And so truck drivers better watch out, you're going to get replaced. Now it's lawyers, radiologists, watch out, right? So we just don't know. It's white collar workers' jobs who seem to be at risk now. It's the junior, artist who comes up with the first draft of something. That person's at risk because generative AI can create that sort of stuff. We just don't know what's going to be, what the economic outlook is going to be. We don't know what jobs are going to be available. We don't know whether it's going to create more jobs than it destroys. If it does create more jobs than it destroys, great. It might not, but we don't know what jobs it's going to create exactly. So, in the face, so then I just think, look, in the face of such uncertainty, pursue what you find really interesting and you think you might be able to make a living on. That's pretty much it. Because prediction is not, you're reading tea leaves. You're not making evidence-based judgment.
Yeah, and personally, I say get right with God. I'm going to leave this last question. I'm going to ask both of you this. In technology, I think this is a fair statement to make, and you both can, of course, rebut the premise. In technology, what we have generally seen over time is that something that starts out fractured and democratized ends up monopolized. Be it Amazon or Google, a behemoth emerges. Is the future of AI these fractured chatbots like you described, Neil, communicating with one another, perhaps with competing interests? or is it one monopolistic AI that controls everything? Neil.
I think it's still going to be fractured, but it's going to be minimal. It's going to be like 2 to 4 major players, and those are going to be the only options. It's the new arms race going on right now. You're wondering why Google is trying to race out Bard and all these things. It's the next wave, and it's the wave that's going to disrupt the current big tech companies. So everybody wants to be part of that big survivor group. I should say big, but the survivor group, which is going to be those top like 2 to 4 companies.
Reid?
So the way that it looks now, and of course, who knows what it's going to look like, a couple of years from now or less, who knows? But the way that it looks now is that there's going to be these base models that are developed by a handful of companies because it requires a tremendous amount of compute power, which means a tremendous amount of money to train these systems. So ChatGPT or Bard, so you're going to have Microsoft and Google and other small, other massive companies or really, really well-funded companies like OpenAI. They're going to build the base models. And then they're going to distribute those base models to the masses, so to speak. And then there's going to be 1,000,001 ways that those base models get fine-tuned. So you will have thousands of AIs created by all the startups out there, individuals in their basements, whatever. But it's all going to rest upon a foundation of a handful of models controlled by a handful of corporate giants.
Well, you kind of laughed, Neil, but I'm going to end this conversation where I began. I do think if this doesn't look like the Matrix, I don't know what does. I mean, her is a stopping point. Her is a blip on our way to being plugged into pods while we live in a virtual world. That's what it sounds like to me. This is a fascinating and terrifying conversation, and one not only worthy of more time, but like I said at the beginning, and certainly in the way you guys describe the next 5 years, really honestly the only conversation that, or at least in every conversation, it should be coming back to the effect that will be had by AI. Thank you guys so much.
Can I say one thing to give a little bit of hope?
Please. I'd love that.
One amazing technology is CRISPR, right? CRISPR gives us the ability to really quickly edit human DNA. Crazy stuff. Great, massive potential benefit. But there was a worldwide ban on using CRISPR on human embryos. It's sort of incredible that the entire medical community across the world said, we're just not going to go there with CRISPR. That's an impressive feat, because if you start messing with the DNA of human embryos, who knows what nightmares can be literally born. Right. If we can do that with CRISPR, then I believe that we can do that with AI as well. But it's going to take a lot of political will and effort.
So really quickly, that's how we'll leave this. Do you think that's what should be done, both of you? Neil first. Do you think that people have called for a 6-month pause, whatever it may be. Do you think we need to quickly either stop or put the fences around this ASAP?
Look, it's the right problem, but that's the wrong solution. It's just not feasible. You're not going to get every country, company, individual to stop, but we need to figure out the right fences. And it's a hard conversation, and that's the problem. Most people aren't willing to have that conversation yet. We got to change that.
And Reid, I take it from your example with CRISPR, then you not only think it can be done, but that it should be done when it comes to AI?
Yeah, that's right. Look, there's I think, right, the 6-month pause, I think, is just sort of operationally foolish, never going to happen. If I had a magic wand, sure, great, but I don't. So it's not going to happen. But we have to have regulation around this stuff. There has to be a worldwide conversation. And there'll be lots of people who say, we need to talk about what the solutions are. In broad strokes, we know what the solutions are. But the main issue is not ignorance about what to do. It's a lack of political will to do the right thing.
All right. Thank you so much. Thank you both. What a fascinating conversation. I hope to talk to you again.
Yeah, my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Hey, it's Will Cain. Click here to subscribe to the Fox News channel on YouTube. It's the best way to get our latest interviews and highlights. And click to subscribe to the Will Cain Podcast for full episodes right now.